So I don't know about you, but I've seen lots of people all over the internet helping key workers and frontline staff in different ways. One thing I noticed was something called a mask extender, which helps to ease the strain on the ears that happens when someone wears a face mask. If you're new to knitting, go and watch my how to knit video first, as it'll teach you the basics, which I don't really cover in this video. So, what you'll need for this is some knitting yarn, some knitting needles. I recommend using a smaller size for this particular project. Some buttons, 2 per mask extender you make. Try to go for buttons which are 2 centimeters or larger, as they'll hold the mask bands in place more effectively. And a tapestry needle. So, step 1. You're going to make a slip knot with your yarn. And then you're going to put your slip knot on one of your knitting needles. Step 2. Now we're going to cast on. Just a reminder, you do this by looping your yarn around your thumb and index finger and then inserting your knitting needle into the centre of this loop, then pulling on your yarn to tighten the loop around your knitting needle. You want a slightly stretchy edge but with some firmness for structure. You want to make sure to cast on 20 stitches here, and this will be the length of our mask extender. Step 3. Before we start knitting, we're going to slip our first stitch on every row, and this helps to create a neat and firm edge. To do a slip stitch, you simply transfer the stitch from one needle to another and pull on the yarn to tighten the loop around your knitting needle. Step 4. For the rest of your stitches, just knit them as you normally would. A reminder of this is going in the stitch with your needle, round the needle with your yarn, through the loop again, and then push the loop off the needle, transferring it onto your other needle. So again, I'm slipping my first stitch of the row and then knitting the rest as I normally would, and you want to keep doing this until you have about 11 rows. If you're wondering how a mask extender works, what it does is sit at the back of your head, and instead of the bands from the face mask going behind your ears, the bands loop around the buttons so that there isn't any pain or friction behind your ears when wearing a mask. This can be really helpful for easing the pain on workers who have to spend all day wearing a face mask for the protection of themselves and others. So, as you knit more rows, you'll be able to see the structure in the edges of your knitting, which shows the importance of doing that slip stitch. Making these mask extenders is really great, as they're a small knitting project that takes hardly any time at all to achieve. It can be a great way of practicing knitting, as well as helping out key workers. You don't need to have lots of different colours of wool to do them, you can make plenty with just one colour. I'm sure if you know anyone who is a key worker and has to wear a face mask, they'd massively appreciate you giving them one of these mask extenders. Step 5. Once you've knitted your final row, we need to cast off or bind off, and to do this you want to slip stitch your first stitch again as you normally would and then knit a stitch. Then slide the first stitch over the second stitch and off the knitting needle. Do this until you only have one stitch left on your needle. Step 6. Once you have cast off your final stitch, threading the rest of your yarn through the final loop until it has made a knot, you want to cut the tail ends of your yarn off the knitting. Then, you want to get your tapestry needle, a long piece of yarn and 2 buttons ready to sew them to your knitting. Step 7. As your yarn is quite thick, you probably want to lightly wet the end of the yarn and twist it between your fingers a little to help push it through the eye of your tapestry needle. This will help make it narrower and hopefully easier to get through. Step 8. Once you've thread your yarn through your needle, this may take some time, don't worry, it took me a while. You want to tie a knot at the end of your yarn. Place the button at one end of your knitting and push the needle through one of the holes of the button and then back through the other hole. You want to do this as many times as possible to secure the button in place. Step 9. Once your button is secured in place by the yarn, turn the knitting over and cut your yarn. With the remaining yarn attached, you want to knot this as tight as you can so it keeps the button from loosening on the knitting. Step 10. Now you want to do the same with the other button on the other end of your knitting. So again, knot the end of your yarn attached to your tapestry needle, place the button at the other end of your knitting and sew the button in place, going through the holes as many times as you can to secure it. Then, tie a knot at the back of the knitting to secure the button in place. Cut the ends of your yarn that are left from tying your knots just to neaten the mask extender up. If you feel as though the button is loose or you couldn't secure it enough with your yarn, feel free to get some thread and sew the button more securely on top of your yarn. And there you have it. You've successfully made a mask extender. This is just a little picture of another one I made too. Please post pictures of ones you make in the comments. If you have any more questions about making or donating mask extenders, just get in touch.